Yeah, okay. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will show you all of the books I read so far in 2024 before my 30 books in 10 weeks goal. So I will show you the books within the order that I read them. So the first book, Haiku, the second volume. It is, if you don't know what Haiku is about, it's basically about Japanese boys playing volleyball and they're really young. It has an anime, but I like the manga more, and it's amazing because I love the main character so much, and there's this one character that I love. His name is Tanaka, and he's so crazy. I love him. Yeah, it's this dude right here. I love him so much. It's Tanaka Ryunosuke. I read this in Korean because I got them in Korea and I fell in love with them, so I kept reading them in Korean. So if you are wondering why I speak English and why I'm reading in Korean, is because of that. I started reading Haiku in Korean and I had to continue in Korean until I could actually read it in its own language, Japanese. But that's not gonna happen in the near future. So we're gonna have to stick with Korean. So the second book is, do I have it here? Second book I read is Choke by Planuk. I don't know how to say his last name, but he is one of my favorite American authors. I read his first book and I read Fight Club, and then I read this, and this was the fourth book by him that I read. It talks about college dropout taking care of his mother, and who's also an addict. His way of thinking and his way of seeing things, and how life is so meaningless for him. It's almost like he's not taking anything seriously, at the same time taking everything seriously. And so you kind of get to see like two sides of the main character, and you're like, oh, so he thinks that way, and then you're like, no. And his addiction is basically sex. So I love his writing, and if you've never read Chuck's works, I would say you should not start with this one, because in my opinion this was one of his weak books. Like, it's good, it's very good, but it's definitely not as good as his other books that I have read. I believe that there are other books that I haven't read that are probably much better than the ones that I read. I gave a 4 out of 5 stars because I didn't think that it was like 5 out of 5 stars Chuck Palahniuk book, if that makes sense. And then I read Given Volume 2. This book is a BL, and it is about a band, and it is about boys who fall in love in the band, and it's painful in some ways. The story goes through a bit of a problematic start, and you're like, oh, poor guy, and then you're like, oh, that's sweet, and then you continue reading it. So if you're into mangas, you've probably heard of this, and if you're into BL, you definitely know this. There is also an anime. I haven't watched it. I did watch Haiku, but I haven't watched this one. So yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because the first volume was better than this one. I read the third volume, but I did not finish it. So, The Idiot by Elif Batuman. I have a lot of things to say about this book. This book wrecked me in the sense of like, it was not what I was expecting. It is about a girl, a Turkish girl, who gets to study at Harvard and who finds love, relationships, and friendships, and being in a foreign country but not being actual foreign. And just like with her Turkish identity, she kind of feels a little bit distant, but also she's distant with her own culture because she doesn't speak Turkish as well as, you know, her family and stuff. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it was kind of like I had mixed feelings about the book. So I gave it a 3 out of 4 stars because, do you know what? I didn't think that the story was good. I'm sorry, this is an unpopular opinion, but the story was just so simple. It reads fast, it reads easily. The story is actually intriguing, but it's also very simple. And I don't like those types of stories because I have read so many of them, and this didn't bring me enough excitement and joy reading it. And I did not like some of the sub meanings of the text. Maybe if you're not Turkish, maybe if you don't know how Turkish culture is, this book might give you the wrong impression about the Hungarian also. So this book was a little bit controversial in my opinion. It's good. You should read it. There are so many parts that I highlighted, but it's also not very, I think it's overrated. Now that I think about it, I think it's good, but not as good as people make it to be. So, I mean, it did get the prize, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sure on that. And I read this poetry book. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. There are some poems that I really loved, and there are some poems that I did not understand. And they're like not like old poems. They're like 1998. So it was good. It was basically not my, like, he did not become my favorite poet at all. Yeah. And then I read this book because it was recommended on TikTok by Jack Edwards, and I was like, oh, an Englishman is recommending a Turkish book, how insane. And then I read it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The story was good, but I did not enjoy it because the writing was not good in Turkish. I don't know how the translation is, but the Turkish writing wasn't that good. It was like pieces of text all bound together in a weird way. In the beginning, it's good. Like, you're like, oh, this is a new thing, this is a new style, I'm not familiar with this. But then it gets, oh, wow, this is her style, and it's not that well. Like, reading it is not easy. So, not in the sense of like a difficult vocabulary-wise book. It's like, it reads slow. It doesn't have that flow. So I didn't really enjoy much of it. And I, like, to this day, I can't remember what the book was about. It was about the author's life, but I can remember only snippets of the scenes, nothing else, and the hospital, but nothing else. So that kind of says something about it. And then I read this book by Annie Ernaux. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Yes, I did. It's this book. I read it, I took it from the library, so I don't have the physical copy with me. It is basically talking about supermarkets in the 90s, if I'm not wrong. But the book was published in 2016, and so she tells her life story through supermarkets, and it's so enjoyable. It's very lovely, and the author's language was really clever, and the way she makes words sound and the way she creates stories, and all of the stories are set in the supermarket, which is awesome. And I love the book a lot, but I gave it 4 stars because I knew Annie Ernaux would have other books that I would give 5 out of 5 stars. So that's why I gave it 4. I don't think it's her best work, but it's one of the most amazing books I've ever read this year. So I highly recommend. And then I read Given 3, but I did not finish it, so I will not be grading it yet. I will finish it, and then I want to finish the whole series, so then I can, either recommend or not recommend you the books. And then I read The Vegetarian, which was a turn of events. This book, Hangan won the prize, the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I love her. I have a Korean friend that loves her. I have only her who knows who Hangang is. God, after I read this book, something changed in me. This book changed who I was. I keep talking about this book in every video that I have probably, but it's so good. This book is about how the society drives women crazy and then call them crazy. Actually, no, they don't call them crazy. They make the women call themselves crazy and then blame them for feeling crazy, and then they actually go mad. It was awesome. It is feminist literature. It is feminine rage, and it is fantastic. So I definitely recommend this book to anyone, especially men, because how dare you do all of those horrible things and then think, wow, she's just crazy. No, you drove her crazy. She wasn't crazy. She was just a little bit overwhelmed, but that was it. And then you made her think that she was crazy, and then she started acting crazy, and then you started acting crazy. You were the actual crazy one, and then you made her feel dumb and ugly, and then now she's in the hospital thinking that she's crazy. So yeah, I hate the men in this book. Though I hate most men, but I hate especially these men in the book. All of them. They're horrible. They're horrible. So if you're a little bit worried if this is going to be a little bit traumatic, it will, but it's not like really horrible. Like Sayaka Murata? Sayaka Murata's Earthlings book. Not traumatic like that. It's traumatic, but it's like a little bit of psychological. It's not like physical horror. It's more psychological-ish horror, if you can call it horror, because it's real time. It is happening real time, and it's real. It's completely real. So yeah. And then I read a very sweet book, because I said, you know what, I read such a heavy read and now I have to read something sweet. And then I got this book on Amazon, impulse buy. I saw the cover and I said, oh, this is the same publishing house as before the coffee gets cold. And then I got this book, and it is about a sweet shop manager who meets an old lady who wants to work for him. And it's set in Japan, it's set in the Sakura time, and it's beautiful. It tells you how you can live a life to the fullest, and why you should live your life to the fullest, and why it matters to have some hopes and dreams for the future, because your hopes and dreams are the only things that hold you onto this life. So you basically need your dreams to be alive. I think I interpreted it the way that I said. Maybe you think it's different, maybe you review it differently, but I loved how sweet, how warm it made me feel. And it was the summertime when I read this, so I did not feel overwhelmed at all. But it was sweet, it was lovely, and it has some life lessons that you can actually pick up if you read closely. So I highly recommend. And I started like putting some marks over my books with this one because I said, you know what, it has so many good like citations, so I should just stick them in. So that's what I did. I read Family of Liars. Such a big book. It's so big. It's like bigger than my head. But this book is the prequel of We Were Liars. It talks about the like families and the parents of the characters in We Were Liars. And if you don't know what We Were Liars is, then you should not listen to this part of the video. So I think the parents are a little less problematic, and this book was worse than We Were Liars because you kind of know what's going to happen. You kind of know how the parents are going to react. So you read it by knowing. So I think at that point, you're like, oh, okay, this shit is going to happen. So you're not very excited when the shit happens. The only part that I liked was the bit where, you know, they figure out who actually protected them over the crime that happened. The end is very good, but the middle and the beginning is a little bit slow. It's much slower than the first one. And so I did not like it as much as other people did on the internet. And then I read The Cost of Living by Deborah Levy. It's such a lovely autobiography. I did not read the first one, I read the second one, and it is like a 3-book series, but they're not connected to each other, so you can definitely read this one without reading the first or the third one, or you can read 3-2-1, or you can read 2-3-1, or you can read 2-1-3. So it's not like a regular order that you have to follow, like Lord of the Rings. It's not like that. You can read this one. It basically talks about Deborah Levy's life and how, like, what happened in her life that made her who she is. And it's a lovely, lovely autobiography. I read this because I wanted to read more genres, like different genres that I wasn't really familiar with. And I haven't really read any autobiographies that weren't like historical, extremely historical, famous people, like, I don't know, like kings and like sultans and yeah, Greek philosophers and stuff. I haven't read anything like modern autobiographies, so that's why I picked this up and I read it, and it was recommended by Melissa on TikTok. So I was like, I need to get this one and I need to read this one. I read this one and it's 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read this year, so I highly recommend this book. This is a collection of short stories by Sabahattin Ali. He is a Turkish author, and you can see how much I marked it. It is basically a society criticism, and it's one of the most perfect collection of short stories because they're the perfect length. They're not very long, they're not very short. They're perfect length, bite-sized, societal criticism stories. So I highly recommend, if you can read Turkish and if you can find it in English with a translated version, I completely recommend this one. Right away. And then, you know what? I said, I read enough of real world things. I should just read something fun and funny. Not just like enjoying, but like funny. And I read this manga, Otakoi and Love is Hard for Otakus. No need to explain. It's basically about 2 otakus falling in love in the way otakus would. It was very funny. It was long though. Like, it's one of the longest like mangas I've ever read. I think this was a webtoon or something, but whatever. I loved it. It was amazing. It was cringy, but it's supposed to be cringy, and it's cringiness just makes it much more fun. So I loved it. It was so good. It's Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro. I know I'm gonna get jumped in the comments when I say this, but I don't care. This book is overrated. Ishiguro's writing is amazing. The characters are good. The writing is good. The story itself, well, very innovative, very interesting and intriguing, and it stirs a lot of questions in your mind. It kind of brings a novel perspective into the world. So the more you read, the more you question how the world is set and how the world is built and what values we are missing from what the world was built on. So it kind of like reinstates all of the values that we should have and stuff, but it's overrated. I saw millions of people crying to this book, crying their hearts out and saying it's one of the most emotional books that they have ever read. And I'm like, have you ever read Jane Austen? Because girlies, this is emotional, okay? But this is not Jane Austen emotional. It's like, yeah, you get emotional, but it's not like it's the deepest, saddest story. Like, you know what's gonna happen in the end. You know what's gonna happen. You can imagine. So why do you cry knowing that something bad's gonna happen? It's like they both die at the end. That, you know, that book where you know like they're both gonna die, but you don't know how they're gonna die. In this book, you know how they're gonna die. You know what's gonna happen. So it's like how did you get that emotional? You're not reading The Little Life. You're just reading Never Let Me Go. And it's sad, it's good, but it's overrated in the sense of like being really emotional and makes you cry. No. It did not make me cry, and I cry really easily. If that doesn't say anything, I don't know what does. So, yeah. And I read 2 other short story books. One of them is The Ghost of Canterville and Mask by Anton Chekhov. And these are by a publishing house in Turkey that publishes short classical stories. And I read them because I did not have any idea of like what Oscar Wilde had to say in his short stories. I know what his other works are, but I didn't know his like short stories. And so I was like, okay, let's get this one and just try to read it. And then I did, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars because it had 2 stories in it, and it was amazing. I love them both. And for Anton Chekhov, I love Chekhov. And Mask I read when I was like in middle school. And so I said, I don't remember anything by Chekhov. I only remember like 2 or 3 books. So I said, do you know what? Like, let's get the stories also and then read them. And I read them and they were amazing. And the last book that I read was Flush by Virginia Woolf. I have a few marks. This is the biography of Barrett's dog named Flush, a Cocker Spaniel. It was lovely. It was beautiful. It was fun reading. It was sad at times, but it was an easy read. But personally, because this is talking about a dog, it's not giving the wolf vibes, because Wolf is like, you know, that feminist icon author, British and da 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 da, like Remo van Zoon. But this one was just so wholesome that it is a little bit different. The vibes are a little bit different because it talks about a dog basically. But I loved it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I don't think this is going to be one of my favorite Wolf books, but it was lovely. It's like fall vibes, and yeah, I think you should read this in autumn. So yeah, that's it. I have read 18 books but I will keep it up to 48 by reading 30 in the next 8 weeks. I have left 8 weeks, and yeah, I will try my best doing that. And I'll see you in my next video. Alright? Bye!